Well, I'm back with a guest who's been on our radio program, Dr. Max Fomitchev-Zamilov. How you doing, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Now, for those who haven't heard from you or new to your work, could you give us a little background on your work and your bio and who you are?
Sure, yes. I have a master's and PhD in computer engineering, and for many years I was a software engineer. And for 80 years, I taught software engineering at Penn State. So I was an associate professor at Penn State before I retired from the university to focus on my own company, Maximus Energy Corporation, within which I manufacture my own radiation detection equipment that I sell to all major universities and to researchers worldwide for all sorts of nuclear experiments. And I'm free to pursue my own research, and that's what I always wanted. My main research is on nuclear fusion, but every now and then I take on a tangent. And recently I took on a tangent studying Predynastic ancient Egyptian stone vessels.
Pre-dynastic ancient Egyptian what vessels?
Stone vessels.
Stone vessels. Okay.
Yeah, the ones that look like this.
Is that a real one?
Yeah, it's a real one. Yes,
How
it's
did
a
you
real
get hold
one.
of that?
Well, I borrowed it from a collector named Matt Bell, Bell supermarkets, right?
Okay.
Throughout Florida. So he owns about 80 of these vases. So he collected them privately. And he was very curious to see, what is so special about them because people have been speculating online. Most notably, I got my inspiration from Ben Van Kerkwijk and his channel Uncharted X, where they have looked at a number of these vases and they've showed that they are incredibly precisely made. In fact, they're so well made that they argued they could have not been made by hand in ancient times, with known flint, copper, and stick tools that archaeologists tell us that the ancient Egyptians used. So I watched his videos and I got interested. So I don't remember how, but I got introduced to Matt Bell, and he said, "Oh, by the way, I have about 80 of these, and I scanned a bunch of them on a CAT scanner. CAT scanner, the machines for that uses X-rays. And the beauty of CAT scanner is it gives you like a three-dimensional scan, so it's not just outer surface. You get to see inside the object as well. And those scans were exported as STL 3D models, and because I'm a computer wizard or used to be a computer
What's
wizard.
SDL? What's a SDL 3D
It's
model?
it's a standard 3D file format
Okay.
that anybody uses.
Yeah.
So I imported those STL files in MATLAB and I wrote code to do my own measurements because the first thing a scientist does, you don't trust someone else's results, right? So you derive your own results. So I took the 3D scans that Matt Bell shared with me. And each scan of a vase, like this, I basically sliced horizontally. And as you slice a round object horizontally, you get circles or something that looks like a circle. It's kind of like if you chop a sausage, you get this, circular slices. So that's what I've done. On a computer, I sliced it horizontally because the vase was upright, got the circles. And I had to devise a quality metric. So when you look at how well something made, you need to come up with an objective criterion, when you compare two pieces. And the criterion I chose is if you slice it, how round the slices are. Yeah, that's obvious, right? And then if there is a bunch of slices, is how concentric they are. So a perfect object, let's say you have a perfect cylinder drawn in CAD. If you slice it, you get perfect circles that are perfectly axial. But if you made this cylinder yourself, your slices will not be too round and they will not be on the same axis. So I took that, and because these vases are hollow, they have outer and inner surfaces. So I did it for outer surface, for inner surface, and I also cross-referenced outer surface versus inner surface, basically how well the vase is hollowed out with respect to its shell. And lo and behold, out of the 22 objects in Matt Bell's collection, 11 were of very high precision according to this quality metric that I devised. And to put things in perspective, I also bought like 3 vases off eBay. You go to a gift shop in every museum, you can find a stone vessel that was made by some Pakistani or Bangladeshi, basically in a sweatshop. But it was made on a lathe. We're talking high quality objects that were made and using contemporary technology on a lathe, but quickly, they turned them out like 100 a day. So I got 3 of those got scanned. And there were also 2 vases that were made in Russia, handmade by a lady whose name is Olga Vdovina. And she was associated, or is associated, with a project called Scientists Against Myths. It's a very popular, ground roots project in Russia where people try to debunk, various theories about past. So they said, okay, we're going to make a couple of these vases the way ancient Egyptians did. And she, well documented it. So she used stone and stick and sand and flint. So she did emulate Egyptian technique. And they scanned a couple of the vases that she made, and I download those scans as well. So we have 22 vases from Matt's collection, then 3 from gift shop, and 2 that were handmade. And I crunched the data for all of them and what are the results. So when I plot the results, the vases fall into 2 distinct categories. There is a category that's clearly consistent with handmade quality. So 11 vases in Matt Bell's collection. And by the way, when you look at them, they look fine. When you just eyeball them, you cannot tell it was handmade. It was that well made. But, the computer analysis doesn't lie. So the slices are not perfectly circular. They're not perfectly concentric. The outer surface is not perfectly aligned with the inner surface. So 11 vases were like that, and 2 of the vases that Olga made. So clearly, whatever Olga made, with those stones were entirely consistent, with manual labor and 11 vases from that collection. Well, the other 11 vases, however, were consistent with the vases made on a lathe. So the 3 modern vases.
What's a lathe again?
Lathe is a tool where you turn something and you have a cutter. It's a typical tool that's used for machining. So you have a chuck, and your object is held in the chuck, and then either chuck turns and you have a cutter, or maybe chuck is static and your cutter is moving. But it's an actual machine where something is turning. So the 3 modern vases were consistent with the other 11 vases from Matt Bell's collection. But the most astonishing part was that he had several vases that were maybe like 10 times more precise than these modern gift shop vases. And to put things in numbers, the accuracy on one of his vase was 2 10,000ths of an inch, or basically 10 microns. So imagine if you need to express something in microns, because thousandths of an inch aren't cutting it because you're going into fractions. But it was basically round and concentric, within 10 microns. And that just, blew my mind, because it's difficult to do that on any kind.
How do we know the dating of these vessels, though?
Well, we know that's a good question. And then that's, when I went into this project with Matt, he was open-minded enough to where he said, well, I'm a private collector. I bought this at an auction. And when you buy something at an auction, they give you a provenance, because, these are, major auction houses. It's not like, you bought something off eBay. So he bought them, from legitimate auction houses, and they typically give you a provenance document that describes, previous ownership and, how this object, was found. But I don't pretend to be an expert on that, so I cannot really critique provenance. So therefore, the scientific conclusion that I pass, I say, either, if these objects are truly genuine, then, ancient Egyptians didn't use sticks and stones to make them. They used some kind of machinery or some kind of advanced manufacturing techniques that are on par or better than contemporary machining. Or, these objects are genuine fakes. I cannot really tell. But the interesting thing is there are many of these objects in museums, worldwide. Any museum you go, they have a bunch. So I heard a group of, there is another gentleman called Adam Young. He's also a collector, and he also one of these, discoverers of this unparalleled precision. So he went to Petri Museum, and he had his associate, Carolee Poca, scan a few of these vases. I don't know what the results are. They haven't, published them yet or disclosed them yet, but they submit and speculate that they will see, the same level of accuracy as in these privately owned artifacts that they had scanned previously. And some of those
artifacts. They're scanning somebody else's vases, or the same ones you have?
No, they scan some of the museum vases, and that's
different from your sample.
Right. Right. And that's
And
what
they
I'm
look
eager.
identical to yours or different?
Very similar, extremely similar.
Can we see it
That,
again here for the audience to see on
sure,
video?
yeah.
If you're on audio right now, this is how would you describe this pattern? I'm not a potter.
Well, I mean, this vase is unusual because it has these, ridges on it, but typically it's just, round surface.
And
And
what
you
would
have,
they use this for?
nobody knows. They say it was an ointment jar. It was for spices. Who the heck knows? But the interesting thing is there are hundreds of thousands of this. And Petrie collected the biggest stash of them. Flinders Petrie is British archaeologist. So Cairo Museum, British Museum, Chicago Institute of Art, Boston Museum, UPenn, they all have them. And as I said, they seem to fall into two categories. I think there is this precise category that tends to be the oldest, and that's what is called pre-dynastic or early dynastic. And there is also a less precise category, which I dare say are Egyptian imitation. So meaning that I think that ancient Egyptians inherited this extremely precise artifacts, maybe from an earlier civilization, and that's just a wild guess at this stage. And they were trying to emulate and make some of them themselves, which they clearly did, but there is a big difference in quality. The older vessels, and some of these older vessels are found like in Neolithic graves. Literally, I'm not making this up. So imagine finding a vase like this in a Neolithic burial somewhere in Egypt, and that's what is called pre-dynastic. It was before Egypt, became a kingdom.
Has there been any dating techniques on this? Any idea of what precise
Well, they
range of
say
date
it's
this
about
is?
4,000 BC, the oldest of them go.
So that one you're holding in your hands?
Well, arguably it's 4,000, 4,500 BC,
So that's 6,000 years old then.
Right. So, and I'm saying arguably because, this is a private collection item. So it's hard to argue it's
How's it holding up so well? Usually you have
because
those
it's
you can't
basalt.
touch it.
That's the thing, it's basalt. And I think
Oh, okay.
they dropped it on the floor and it didn't break. It's real hard and real heavy.
You
But
dropped it on the floor.
he did, yeah.
Oh.
And it didn't break. But on some of this, the walls are real thin. That's another, mystery. How do you make something out of granite? Yeah, and have a wall that's only like a couple of millimeters thick. And in fact, they're so thin when you shine a flashlight, you can see through granite, how thin that is.
I know that they use basalt for magnetoculture in France for different agricultural purposes for using magnetic fields.
Interesting. Yeah, but one of the reasons he lent
I
this
just
vase,
wonder if it's magnetically active. Have you looked at it?
I haven't yet, but I was looking in terms of whether it has any trace radioactivity. So the other two vases that I studied, I looked for trace radioactivity. I didn't find it, but I did put a couple of them into my electron microscopes.
Can I see inside of it? Is there a plug-in in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's hollowed out.
Okay.
You
Yeah, you're
cannot
just staring
see-
into the abyss here. Let's put
Right.
that right up on the camera. If it's can you put it closer?
Yeah, it's
Staring
hollowed out.
into folks, we are staring into the black void of our past at this
Right.
point. Dear
It's
God.
hollowed out amazingly well.
Yeah.
So the wall thickness is very uniform and it's hollowed out, you can see it's like precisely centered. So it's very well made.
It looks like those little vases that Winnie the Pooh used to store his honey in,
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's the same shape.
Yeah. Goodness.
There is a great variety of them and great quantity, and most of them were found under the stepped pyramid of Djoser.
Who?
Yeah, stepped pyramid of Djoser. This is a pyramid in Egypt.
That's the
Where,
old school ones before the Great
Right.
Pyramids, right? Yeah.
yes, well, so we think, right? Where the like tens of thousands of these were found, and to this day there are hundreds of thousands of shards of these vases in that pyramid that people walk over. There's just been so many of them that it's mind blowing where they came from.
You're
how
not
they-
allowed to collect them and see if they compare to
Well,
yours.
it's illegal. People
Yeah.
do steal shards because you walk onto them, but technically it's illegal. They catch you.
Have you thought about speaking with the Egyptologists in Egypt and so forth and seeing if they could help you with some of this comparisons?
I think
comparison.
this discussion is already happening. Without much of my participation
Okay.
because I sort of came in lately into it. And
Yeah.
to give you perspective, the original findings that these vases were precise were published maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. That's when a bunch of videos were made on the YouTube. But I would submit that those findings weren't scientifically accurate because they were doing like spot analysis. spot analysis, and there wasn't comparison to modern artifacts, and it wasn't comparison to handmade artifacts. So I think what I've done, I put it like on a scientific footing because I analyzed a large sample and I developed an automated technique that does everything for you without human intervention. So there is no like human factor involved. And I also compare it against handmade versus machine-made tools. So I have a baseline, what a handmade object looks like and what a machine-made object looks like. And that's what gives me ability to automatically classify this. So, but I think, Dibble, he is the archaeologist who spat with Hancock at Joe Rogan's.
Oh yeah, the ones that had the dispute. Yeah.
Right. So he has a channel and he's been invited to a bunch of podcasts where he tried to pour cold water on these vases. But I dare say that his argument was unsound.
Specious.
But he also didn't have my paper. So now, when he gets a chance to read my paper, if he cares to read it, he'll see that, my analysis is not like hand waving. It's based on data analysis.
Have you shared this with folks like Graham Hancock?
No, I mean, I don't know them. So how would I share it with them?
It sounds like you've been doing getting some attention about this. I'm curious if they reached out.
Just a little bit. I mean, I've spoken to Matt Bell on his podcast called Limitless, and Uncharted just did a new episode, and they mentioned my work. So, there is a little bit of discussion going on. And I submitted a paper to scientific.
So what's next for you on this project? Anything else you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I submitted a request to study some objects at Chicago Institute for the Arts. They have a museum with Egyptian collection. And I submitted a request to study some of the objects at the Flinders Petrie Museum. So if those requests get granted, I'll do my own scans and I scan the objects that I think should be scanned. And I'll be able to present a result that spans not just, private collection where the provenance is questionable, but, if you go to a museum, arguably the question of provenance disappears because objects in museum collections tend to be better documented. It's better known how they were found, where they were found, who collected them. So if I'm able to get a hold of museum pieces and scan them and also show that they fall into two categories, then we need to revisit how these objects were made. Yeah. Because what my analysis shows, they were not made using hand tools.
What are some speculations as to other methods they could have used that would be not as exotic as some people's theories?
Well, because I'm a nuclear scientist, I have a very exotic theory of my own. Because there is a joke when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So because I'm a nuclear scientist, I'm thinking, well, let's go with Hancock and say there was an advanced civilization way back when. I don't know, aliens or Atlantis, and I don't really care. But what is clear to me is this civilization wouldn't have used the same machining techniques we're using. I think it's silly to think that someone far more advanced than we are was using the same laces and end mills. So my speculation is whatever that advanced civilization was, they probably mastered nuclear technology. And as such, they use nuclear machining. And nuclear machining is not new. In fact, we use it in electron microscopes and in circuits manufacturing. There are ion beams. So you can etch, let's say you can etch silicon with ion beams. You can strip layers of materials with ion beams. But we cannot make like an entire part using ion beams because we don't have the power yet. But if an advanced civilization mastered nuclear science to a greater degree than we have, so who is not to say that they couldn't get enough power to have a very powerful ion beam to strip off layers of material? So that's the hypothesis that I'm entertaining, and that's the hypothesis I'm looking to examine when I look at the spots. So if I put it under electron microscope or under some of the other spectrometers that I have in my laboratory, I should be able to see traces of this nuclear process. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm interested in, whether I find it or not, it's anybody's guess. But one thing we did not find when we looked at the spots, we didn't find any traces of copper. So the common theory that these were, made, using copper or bronze tools and just doesn't hold water, according to my analysis, because I haven't found like a single copper atom on it. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, there is a little bit of copper everywhere, but I didn't find enough of it, to show up on any of the spectra. you'd expect if this was cut, using copper tools, you'd expect to find some, but we didn't. We did find traces of other metals like iron and titanium, but not enough to be attributed to ablation from the end mill or from the bits of the instrument that was cutting. And that's, what made me think that maybe some other technique was used, maybe like nuclear machining, because there is, these samples are remarkably clean. It doesn't look that clean, but the surface is very clean. When you put it under electron microscope, it's not contaminated. So how is this possible that it's not contaminated with anything? That, that's one of those things I don't understand, and that's what makes it interesting to me.
That defies, is that beyond the standards of modern techniques for?
Well, I wouldn't say beyond, is just unusual, because I used electron microscope a lot, and every time you put a sample in it, you're like supposed to wear gloves to where you don't contaminate it. With this, we didn't wear gloves, so this analysis isn't particularly well carried out, but we didn't see any other contaminations. And any sample that I put from my lab, even I try to maintain cleanliness and whatnot, I find like all sorts of stuff on it, but not on this sample. So I don't know, was it because they were made differently, or because they were cleaned with sand, or they were plasma etched or acoustically cleaned? I don't know. But those are the things that come to mind, because sound cleans pretty well, plasma etching cleans pretty well. So I could say, well, maybe these were made using acoustic technique, plasma technique.
Yeah.
Or maybe, they just, sat in sand for so long to where sand just cleaned it completely and there is nothing left on it. Also a possibility.
In 1 minute, what are the implications of this if it bears out what you're saying? Is
Well,
your hypothesis of what you
right.
think?
Right. So the people who started this project, they are trying to prove that another civilization existed way back when, kind of like, Graham Hancock's thesis, because these weren't made, using primitive tools. And I would say, this is obviously a far-fetching speculation that requires probably more than a pot to prove. But, what I am willing to say scientifically, that, pots like this were not made, using primitive tools the way, mainstream archaeologists say they were made, because the resulting quality is just inconsistent with handmade tools. And as such, the only conclusion that we can pass, that either, there were other tools available to ancient Egyptians that we're not aware of, tools that are on par with modern machines, or, somebody else manufactured them in a way before Egyptians, and Egyptians just inherited them as heirlooms.
Mm. And that would suggest that perhaps the Great Pyramids are older than the Step Pyramids.
Yeah, perhaps. Or
the Step Pyramids were like imitations of the original.
Right.
Perhaps, right.
Right. But this kind
when
of
I went down in one of those pyramids in Egypt, it smelled like cat urine.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to go.
Would you, when I remember when I was driving through Cairo, I just remember a visceral feeling. I looked at all the modern architecture, and the apartment complexes were like Lego pieces constructed ad hoc, almost falling over. Looks like the roof caving in, and just swaths and swaths of people. And then you see the city structures and modern architecture. And then when you continue, you see these things beaming out in the distance, and you're like, that's not the same.
Right,
That's
right.
something, I don't know what it is, but that's not the same. There's no trajectory here that goes from that to this, unless there's been some kind of catastrophe or something.
And it's backwards, right? So
Yeah.
you have beautiful, precise buildings constructed in the past and modern hovels.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time and research here. Where can people go? One thing before you give your website and everything that I'm going to have to pull you into is the Shroud of Turin research. You're going to get involved in that, I think. I think you could help us with that. Have you looked into that?
Well, I heard it's mysterious.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested, yeah.
Yeah. Because that actually involves speculation by nuclear scientists of some type of nuclear radiation. I want to get your expert opinion on that. So I'll bring in next time, I'll bring in a Shroud of Turin guy and to talk, and maybe we'll do a show on that. Get your thoughts on that or something.
Very good. Yeah.
And where can people find your work if they want to read your report and analysis?
Yes. If you want to read my analysis, go to maximus.energy, which is my website. And then under my blog, you'll find a post that's called Astonishing Precision of Predynastic Egyptian Stone Vessels. So it's on my website, maximus.energy, where you can read it.
All right, we'll put that in the description of the show. Thank you for your time, and it's great talking to you.
Thank you, David. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.